Hey everyone, James here. Today I am going to be talking about another Italian crime film, talking about The Day of the Owl, 1968. If you have been following the channel, you probably saw that I brought on How to Kill a Judge from 1975, another really terrific one by Damiano Damiani. Why are these films paired together? Well, it's the same actor-director, it's set in the same place. They're very different films, but they're also recently both released by Radiance Films in a great box set featuring these two, and The Case is Closed, Forget It, also with the same actor-director combo of Damiano Damiani and Franco Nero. This one is actually the first one. I did the episode on How to Kill a Judge just to kind of see, gauge interest, because these are not necessarily what people are going to think of when they think of Italian crime films of this 1960s, 1970s era, or polizioteschi. Nevertheless, I think they are important films within that, and I think they represent like a different arm and a different direction that things could have gone. In some ways, they're sort of the equivalent to, if we look at the Jolly before Bird with the Crystal Plumage was released, a lot of them focused more on kind of like this, the relationships. They're more influenced by Le Diabolique, and less on kind of the set pieces and the style that would come once Argento kind of took what Bava had done with Blood and Black Lace and really solidified it. So in that sense, these films are interesting because they sort of represent a different branch and a different direction that things might have gone, or maybe not. Maybe they're just kind of like these interesting offshoots of interesting different films. For me, at least, a lot of the Damiano Damiani films kind of are the point where sort of like festival dramas, or if you are to read the Roberto Curti book on the Italian crime filmography, where those films, like sort of the Italian neo-realist films of the post-World War II, meet sort of like the genre film and crime genre. And for me, at least, that's a really nice place, because I really like films that kind of will mold genre into something not boring, but try to say something in a little bit of a different manner than kind of the blunt force object that a lot of polizioteschi is. Interesting because this film came out in 1968, so not even in the 70s, so it predates a lot of those seminal U.S. film texts that really informed the polizioteschi genre, things like Dirty Harry, French Connection, even The Godfather. Why The Godfather? Even though that's not necessarily the most influential film, well, this one is also about the mafia, so it's very difficult not to compare them. In fact, it has one of the scores, this time by Bruno Nicolai, that I think might most closely resemble the Godfather score of any of the Italian crime films that at least come to my mind. Mention it in the comments if you think I'm wrong. I'm sure there are some I'm missing, probably something I've seen even. But it's interesting too, because this 1968, the film that really kicked off the polizioteschi genre too, Bandits in Milan, came out the same year. Both of them were very, very successful, but kind of the more northern style film set in the north, where a bunch of crimes and stuff are going on, that film would prove to be far more influential towards the polizioteschi Eurocrime genre just in general. So interesting film here. Like How to Kill a Judge, this one is set in Sicily. The mafia did not like that this film was being made. The local authority did not either. Easy to see why. It's pretty critical of both kind of like the way that the mafia informs sort of like the local governance and things like that, how they are really in charge. So it makes the local authorities look ineffectual and weak, and of course it portrays the mafia as, being murderers. So probably not how they want to look too. But nonetheless, it was very, very successful. It grossed 1.335 billion lira. I don't really know how to contextualize that number, but it's on the higher end if you look at a lot of these different grosses and things like that. Quick synopsis here. Police captain from the north investigates corruption in the mob in Sicily. So this film is set more in the countryside, unlike How to Kill a Judge, which is set in Palermo, which is kind of like their big city over there. And a lot of the people here are really immediately coming off of spaghetti westerns. I believe the last film that Damiano Damiani had directed before this was the really great A Bullet for the General. I think that's probably my favorite spaghetti western by someone that is not named Sergio, which, may or may not say a lot. The three of the great spaghetti western directors were Sergio, but I really like A Bullet for the General. And if you watch his polizioteschi, you could see how that sort of fits in and how it kind of combines, like, we want to have these clear messages and things about what is kind of informing the real world, but we're going to tell it through this genre lens. This is the first mafia movie, and it does, even though it wasn't necessarily the most influential film in terms of kind of creating a high volume of Eurocrime films set in Sicily or anything like that, nonetheless, it did form Damiano Damiani's career, because he did have a bunch of films set in Sicily, including Confessions of a Police Captain and How to Kill a Judge as well. Very intricately designed. Probably something I should have mentioned more about the top two is it's based off a very famous Italian novel. Of course, I have not read it, by Leonardo Scasia. Sorry for the butchering, who I believe is actually Sicilian too. I think it's generally considered kind of a classic Italian literature. And so interesting because, The Godfather, of course, is also based off of a book. I don't know if it has the same sort of class, the Mario Puzo film, but that was also a very popular book at the time, certainly. Probably closer to the pop entertainment, whereas this is probably more of a prestige book, is the feeling that I get from it. Anyways, it was adopted into the film by Damiani as well as Ugo Piero. And a lot of the details and the dialogue and stuff feels very intricately designed. When I had seen this film in 2020, I think I watched the dub version, so I'm happy to have seen it in the Italian version. It's a little strange to see Lee J Cobb being dubbed into this very, very sort of Italian voice. I think they dubbed him in a way that seems at least to be very Southern Italian. Damiani wants to cast all of the angry men. At this point, he would cast Martin Balsam a couple of years later. But for the most part, I'm glad to see it. I think it probably carries a lot more of that local flavor, things like that. When we talk about these films, a comment that I mentioned last time too is that people that are familiar with it, the actual Italian language and kind of the local flavors and the local accents, there's often a lot of stuff that people as outsiders or foreigners like myself are going to miss. And I think this film in particular, because it's set in kind of the deep south of Italy, in Sicily, is going to have a lot of those things going on. Because this is not only in Sicily, but it's also kind of in a more rural area and not kind of the more urban environment of Palermo. I really like also how the geography is well established. Two particular locations really stand out. The opening murder is really great, and that also creates sort of the opening scene, and we get to see kind of a sense of geography of where the road bends and turns. We see where the body ends up being, and it's a scene that is then again visited and revisited because kind of the key part of the whole film is who saw what, and so I really like how Damiani sort of establishes that. Interestingly, it's all established even with the opening credits going over it too. And it's just a really, really great dynamic way to open the film. The other thing that really stands out perhaps even more is the way they construct town square. And there you can really see the power dynamics where we see that both Lee J Cobb's character, who is playing kind of this Don Mariano, I think is his name, so this mafia boss, who can oversee kind of all the things that are going on kind of this city's courtyard. But the police captain can also see. So it's sort of like this warfare is going on in between the two, and they're kind of playing chess, where both of them are kind of looking at each other. They have binoculars at different points. We can see Franco Nero sort of observing them. They'll choose to close the blinds or something like that. So it feels a little bit Rear Window inspired. So interesting that based off of a famous novel, but that's a very, very cinematic technique. Damiani, even though he doesn't necessarily known for very showy visuals, I think he's good visually too. And he was actually a painter originally. The look of the film is also really, really great. It is lensed, the cinematographer is Tonino Dellicoli, who has filmed some very famous films, Good, Bad, and the Ugly, Once Upon a Time in the West. I think it does a great job here kind of capturing this sort of very sunny rural town atmosphere to it. So really, really like the way that they do that. So when we're just seeing the town square and stuff like that, we really get to observe all the things. It's just some great location shooting. Another thing that really stood out in terms of how it was shot too is the different locations they used. A lot of the corruption in this case is taking place in the sort of local development. So the mob is criticized, of course, because maybe they are behind some murders, but they are also responsible for kind of development and giving out these different construction contracts and things like that. So everything is tied and kind of creating this different infrastructure. So the mob is going and saying hey, we're creating this different thing. So there's some great locations where we get to see what is actually being created. So we see some local roads. There's one point towards the end of the film where the local road is actually dug up. So it's almost like the police are fighting against progress, trying to find kind of the dead bodies literally buried underneath the concrete. We see some great construction sites too, and I think it does a good job. So in this case, the mob isn't necessarily directly tied with like prostitution or anything like that. At least we don't see that part of the mob, but we see it tied when creating kind of these very common things. And so the corruption of the local government is really, really tied in with the mob. So I think similar to How to Kill a Judge, Damiani is interested in sort of the dynamics between those, and I think he does a good job capturing that there. Franco Nero in this film is really, really young. And I when reading the reviews, this did not strike me at the time of watching the film, but reading the reviews, a lot of people think he is too young for sort of this police captain. Perhaps he is in a way. He certainly does seem quite a bit younger than his role in How to Kill a Judge. I think he's still in his 20s at this point. And so maybe a little bit of Argento and Stendhal syndrome vibes. But nonetheless, I kind of like it. I don't mind it. At least I'm able to go with it. For me, at least, the part that I find to be a little more distracting is Lee J Cobb as the mafia don. Of course, he's a great actor, but it's just, he's such a famous American actor, too. And I don't believe he has any Italian at all in him, so it's just interesting to see him there. Nonetheless, I think I'm okay with both of the castings there. I think they both do a good job. The third lead is rounded off by the great Claudia Cardinale, and you know, it's a little bit more of an ordinary role, but I think she does a really good job where she's sort of like this pawn piece where people are trying to mold her image and things like that for their own gain. For me, at least, her role reminds me a lot of how different chess players were basically trying to manipulate the different pieces in How to Kill a Judge. Just the different ways people are trying to mold her and get her to do certain things. So she really is kind of like a pawn. So in many ways, a lot of the female roles in these films are sort of thankless roles. They're not necessarily like the most interesting or compelling different roles that are happening. Nonetheless, I think she does stand out. It's probably one of the better female performances of the sort of Eurocrime genre. In particular, she has this one great scene at the end where, spoilers, she's finding out her husband has been murdered, and so she has this sort of great mind where she's like, okay, I need to dress all in black because I know now my husband is definitely gone. And sort of the whole core of the film is centered around her husband having gone missing, and we know that he had seen for her from the beginning. So similar to How to Kill a Judge, other than that opening set piece, pretty much everything happens off screen, which makes it in some ways even more chilling. We also know from kind of that last scene that even though Lee J Cobb at a certain point gets hauled into prison, when we see Claudia Cardinale out there with kind of that meal where she sees all these men and the men are kind of giving her advice and things like that, we know that even though Lee J Cobb is quote-unquote in charge, or maybe he is, maybe he isn't, the machinations and the power structure of the mafia is too strong. It's just getting rid of him isn't going to do much at all. And that it will not matter. It won't bring her husband back. It won't have a huge impact. And that's something that even though Franco Nero is absolutely determined to get him, even resorting to certain dirty tactics and things like that, and a fake confession, and he does make some progress in those regards, he's still not even strong enough to get Lee J Cobb. Not that it even matters for kind of the mob. So in that sense, it's a very, very downbeat message and finale. And for me, at least, I find it to be very, very effective and quite good. Okay, so yeah, let's get into the end. Let's see, who won the film? I'm going to give it to Damiano Damiani. Just kudos to him. I think he's just a really good director. Double feature. I'm going to pair this with another Sicilian set Damiani film that would come a couple of years later, The Most Beautiful Wife. This one stars a very young Ornella Betty, I believe, or Ornella Muti, I think that's her name, and she is really good in this role, probably one of the very best of the female roles in these different films, and I think that one's really, really good too, and you know, the setting is certainly reminiscent of this film as well. So yeah, 7.5 rating again, so very similar to How to Kill a Judge, very, very solid mafia drama here, and I think a film that I would recommend to just about anyone because it has even though the pace is a little slow at different times compared to kind of your Rome Armed to the Teeth or one of your Eurocrime films that's just more of a blunt force object, as I put earlier. It nonetheless offers a lot in terms of thought-provoking drama and things like that. So perhaps not the most rewatchable of the Eurocrime films, but one that I think I enjoyed, at least on a rewatch. So yeah, again, shout outs to Radiance Films, doing great work over there. I still need to decide if I want to bring on the last film of that box set or not. So comment below if you'd like me to talk about that film. If not, that's fine too. Just let me know as well. Thank you all for tuning in. I'll see y'all next time.